Soy Gosha de Agencia Cósmica. Hoy estoy un poco enferma, por eso mi voz es un poco rara, diferente. El tema de hoy, el artículo escrito por Swaruu, que ya fue publicado en el canal de Robert, Despejando Enigmas, la biogenética transdimensional. El artículo es muy importante, se tratará de cosas bastante intensas. Para los que ya habéis visto este artículo en el canal de Robert y no queréis repetirlo, al final de este artículo estoy publicando una conversación que tuve con Swaruu sobre este artículo. Estoy preguntando varias preguntas, entonces expandiendo un poco más algunos temas. El tema es importante y para la gente nueva que no ha visto este artículo aún, recomiendo ver el video de Robert Biologia 1 en su canal. Aquí pondré el link primero, donde Robert explica, a través de Swaruu explica cómo se manifiesta la materia y el cuerpo biológico y el ADN, cómo se manifiesta primero de los planos superiores y después se plasma como su sombra energética en el plano visible material. Entonces es importante entender esto porque este artículo hablará de los experimentos que está haciendo el cabal y las razas regresivas negativas con las almas de las personas, lo que ella llama atmas. ¿Y por qué están haciendo estos experimentos? Porque se han dado cuenta de este proceso, que solamente alterar el ADN en el plano material no va a crear el resultado que ellos desean, que esta línea genética a través de la alteración puramente física de ADN resultará en los daños y los fallos en largo plazo. Entonces tienen que hacer una correspondencia con el alma de este ser primero, lo más importante. Entonces, el artículo trata de estos experimentos. Yo también después pregunto más sobre estos experimentos, de cómo aíslan aslas de los cuerpos humanos y los tienen allí atrapados en los frascos bajo tierra. Es un tema muy serio, muy intenso y de hecho, ¿por qué estamos hablando de eso? También pregunté a Swaruu, ¿por qué nos estás dando esta información? Es importante porque es nuestra conciencia colectivamente y también en el nivel personal que puede parar con nuestra intención todo esto. Tenemos que dar el fuerte no a todo lo que está pasando colectivamente, en la mente, simplemente no estar de acuerdo con lo que está pasando y mandar el fuerte no, oponerse. También el artículo habla de las abducciones, porque se hace algunas abducciones y muy intenso y muy emocionante. También preguntaré por la ascensión y cuándo, si se puede hacer algunas previsiones, porque este artículo dirá claramente que la ascensión es inevitable y este es el fin de la raza humana tal como la conocemos. Fuertes palabras, pero como están las cosas. Y y hablamos un poco de esto en la charla con Swaruu. Voy porque el video es súper largo, no quiero alargarlo más. Hasta luego y hasta el próximo video. Chao. As I have already explained in the first video about biology, biology is generated from higher planes. It is the consciousness that reflects its own shadow, manifesting its form with all intention. From the most expanded point of view, there is no spiritual world and material world, because that is a purely dualistic concept, clearly generated from a position where everything has a contrast, an opposite, duality, and where there is a limited perception. There is only one great all, a unity or a great consciousness that has multiple points of attention that we perceive as isolated persons. but all are connected and make up the great all, the original source, the great self. Each person is a complete holographic fragment of the great all, of the source. The word holographic comes from the Greek holos, complete, and graphos, written. It means that it is complete or completely embodied, something that encompasses and includes everything together without leaving anything out. The word is commonly related to optical holography. The word hologram comes from that. The concept that the image is complete because it is three-dimensional and includes all the details. Each person, being a holographic fragment of the original source, is endowed with all the attributes of the original, because in its own right it is the original. An analogy using optical holography is that if you have a hologram and split it in two, you do not have two halves of the original, but you have two complete images identical to the original one, only half the size. If then we divide them again in 4, in 8, or in any number of fragments, each and every one will have the whole image, including all details and all the information of the original. This is what happens with souls that are nothing other than holographic fragments of the original source. Each of us with the consciousness and the soul are in our own right the original source. This means that we have the same creative powers as the original source. We are all creating not only our world, but our own universe, interpreting it from our particular point of attention. It is this point of attention that leads you to perceive yourself as limited and to assume that what you experience in your life is caused by external factors or elements. But thinking like that is thinking in a deterministic way. As I have repeated again and again, the only thing that limits you is the idea that you are limited. Everything that happens in what we call the external world is perceived through senses and then interpreted by the brain using previous patterns and ideas in the form of agreements to give value to the messages we receive. But everything is perception interpretation, and therefore the result of everything an individual perceives as external reality is only a reflection of the experience he has had previously and of his value system. That is why we create our own reality, because we only see and only focus on what interests us, what most draws our attention, ignoring everything else. We will always receive more of what has most of our attention. In the end, there is nothing external to our own particular interpretation of what we call the external world. But that external world is not more than only more of ourselves, the mirror of our interior. As we said in the first video, for the Tibetan science as well as for many other races, it is the consciousness that generates the matter. And this applies directly to the biology, where in that case it is the consciousness and the specific intention of the individual that reflects from a higher plane towards an inferior one its energetic shadow that, using the principles of stationary waves and dominant frequencies, as well as obeying forms of sacred geometry and its mathematics, materializes in a lower plane the necessary information in the form of DNA to then form the being or avatar that will use there. The process of materialization from an etheric existential plane to another material one obeys the same principle of zero-point energy exactly, but in reverse. That is, instead of accessing the etheric plane from the physical side to achieve energy depolarization, it is made from the etheric side by polarizing the energy in the form of standing waves, which, with the principle of dominant frequencies, thus achieves an effect on the physical side. The unilateral or uniplane existential artificial alteration of DNA forms an altered body, modified but genetically unstable, since it is not the result of a natural formation. This is what the negatives try to do. This artificial being is plagued with health problems, mostly cancers, genetic and autoimmune failures, as we said. Likewise, artificially altered beings tend to disappear after a few generations, even though they are apparently genetically dominant when they are newly created. An example of this is corn and other transgenic grains that are first super-dominant, displacing natural plants, only to decay in a few years or a few generations later. The greater the complexity of the DNA of a genetically altered individual, the more likely it is to have problems generated by the incompatibility between their own genes, where an altered group of these does not agree with another group within the same individual, creating a dissonance that leads to serious health problems. The first place where the problems will be generated will be in the sperm or in the ovules, therefore in the zygotes, due to their high genetic plasticity. This is particularly serious at the time of reproduction for such genetically altered individuals, because the incoming soul has a footprint or shadow embodied as geometric, mathematical, energetic fractals that enter into discord with artificial alteration. Under the principle of the dominant frequency, it will be the admatic footprint that always prevails in the end. As a result of this, said individual either does not manage to reproduce, the product will be sterile, or even worse, the generated product will have incapacitating deformities. In the best case, the individual product can be reproduced a few generations before the dissonance between the DNA footprint and the altered DNA produces or generates the problem that will end with its genetic line. As already stated in other videos, the complex DNA of the human being returns to its original pattern quickly if it has been altered invasively, achieving with it only isolated individuals or finite lines with genetic variants. The only way in which the negatives have managed to alter the human DNA in a durable manner is with the use of advanced mental control, to limit and guide the perception of the individual, and where their consciousness and Atma are manipulated when wanting to turn on or turn off the genes necessary to achieve the genetic change that is desired. This method is effective and has been used by positive and regressive invasive races alike for thousands of years. The problem with this method is that it only has long-term results and also has unexpected results or difficult to control or predict successfully. Another problem with this method is that it fails to create a genetically new breed, but only manages to filter or choose which genes will be activated and which will not, within a limited framework by what is already present in the genome of the original race. It is worth mentioning that this method obeys the fact that it is the consciousness, depending on what it perceives of the external world with its senses, that turns on or off specific genes, since these are not static entities, but are dynamic and always changing. Genes, by design, are made to respond to perception and consciousness. Both cabal geneticists working for the government behind the government on Earth and many regressive races are interested in accelerating the process where the soul or Atma is used to reflect the DNA change of their genetic engineering creations. They try first to generate a being that suits them for their agendas, be it a clone, a hybrid, a chimera, or a super soldier with improved qualities for combat, and then artificially alter an Atma or soul to be energetically agreeable or in frequency with the being created by them. With this cementing or sealing the genetic changes to be able to achieve a new species, or at least a permanent and reproducible genetic alteration. This is attempted in several ways. The most common is by managing to isolate the Atma or signal of the soul, because this is not something localized or separate, but it is a signal of the original source, by means of a sophisticated apparatus of subtle frequencies, in a way of energetic trans-dimensional container battery. This is based on principles of zero-point energy, where a series of experiences controlled by advanced computers is imposed to guide the individual to wish to live or to experience being the subject previously artificially created by them. The Atma does not retract or try to escape because it is in a frequency consistent with it. This makes you believe that you are in physicality or incarnation. It gives you an experience very similar to what it would be if you had a body. In this case, the body from where it was extracted, but it is inside an artificial device or container. In this way, it is also possible to duplicate or copy the Atma by having multiple artificial containers with the same Atma frequency agreement when receiving the same signal from the source. In the same way that several radios tuned to the same station will play the same music. As a variant of the foregoing, a series of electromagnetic frequencies will be artificially imposed upon the new biological being, while it is contained within a medical cocoon, where it is subjected to a long series of artificially created, computer-controlled experiences that change the system of perception and values of the Atma individual that fails to distinguish between simulation and real life. These specific electromagnetic frequencies, controlled by computers artificially, reflect in the brain the images and sequences of experiences desired by the geneticists. And it is the same technology already in use to control the population when being transmitted by the mobile telephone towers. Now, to find the Atmas that already have a frequency similar to the one sought for a specific project, people are scanned with the use of an advanced laser spectrometer that literally reads the frequencies of light or aura of a person. The result is filtered through a computer that will give the results depending on a table or previously written program. This is done in exactly the same way as the one used to read the chemical composition of a star several hundred light years away. These Atma reading laser spectrometers are located mainly in the FLIR systems, or front-looking infrared, for its acronym in English, of equipped aircraft, such as many unmarked black helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and drones. It is also known that they have small portable units the size of a mobile phone. In the case of FLIR systems, they do not need a laser when they are close to the target. Not all FLIR systems have this capability, only those designed or equipped for this purpose. This system also serves to detect extraterrestrial souls or starseeds inhabiting a human being. And with this, you can determine quite accurately its stellar provenance, depending on the frequency of light emitted, by contrasting the result with a database. The controllers, the cabal behind the government, have an extensive database with detailed information on starseeds or extraterrestrials infiltrated as human beings or using a human body, who they are, where they are, and what race they are. Having already found an Atma that agrees enough with their agenda, the subject will be abducted to be used for their experiments and genetic agendas. As the frequency of Atma is directly related to the genetics of the individual, if a specific feature or specificity is recurrently needed by those who perform the genetic alterations, they will recurrently abduct a particular individual or a genetically related family line of individuals who share the interesting specific qualities useful for them. An example of this is the genetic line necessary to house reptilian souls. Not all abductions are performed for the same reasons. There are many causes by which an individual, family, or group of people can be abducted or recurrently abducted. Nor is it a new phenomenon, since it has been given since the beginning of time, both on Earth and in all other planets with biological life based on DNA. This is because multiple races have planted their lives throughout the galaxy and constantly return to see how their crafts have progressed. The exactly same species are found on multiple planets, as long as they meet the necessary requirements for that species to proliferate and develop correctly. Many planets share the same species, but some of these may be found on one planet, but not on another. It is rare to find a species that is found exclusively on a single planet. One or more will have it, and others will not. These species are sown by other more advanced ones with the interstellar flying capacity, fulfilling various agendas ranging from the exploitation of natural resources to purely altruistic ones that only seek the creation of new worlds in harmony, or just seek to give a particular species a habitat that favors it so that it can develop and perpetuate itself freely, often saving it from extinction. Most people relate abductions with something negative, but the abductions that I will call original, for lack of a better name, are always positive. One of species that abducts the most are variants of the small grays. It must be understood that at least 165 different species of greys have been registered, with innumerable subspecies among them. Most have a biology based on botany, that is, from the strictly genetic point of view, they are plants. But there are also silicon-based, carbon-based, similar to the human, and artificial robotic and biological robotic, and these last two are mostly in the service of regressive negatives. These benevolent little greys have as their agenda the care of biology on Earth,
and are commonly known as gardeners. When someone is abducted by them, they can easily be mistaken for the negative ones by being tactless and very inconsiderate and very abrupt in their procedures. They act very mechanically with the sole intention of ending the procedure quickly, because they have many more to do at the same night. But they should not be confused with robotic grace in the service of negatives. These are specifically designed to try to pass themselves off as benevolent gardeners. The most notorious difference is that the positive gardeners always work alone, while the robotics will have another race supervising them, usually humanoid milab, mantis or reptile. What they do, among other things, is to return or repair the genetics of a body in accordance with what the Atma inside it needs, so that it can continue or end its life plan satisfactorily. They alter the nuclear DNA of the bone marrow so that they can generate stem cells that are consistent with the basis of the body's normal process of cell duplication and regeneration, to be consistent with the specific frequency that the gardeners already have. How exactly they do all this is sensitive material because the negative ones could apply it. They will adapt genetically and in specific frequency both the nuclear and mitochondriatic DNA in the ovules and in the body of a woman, so that she can support the necessary frequency and genetics of her future daughter or son, which they already know who and how it will be. This mostly if the product is of the higher Atmatic frequency than the mother, as in the case when a human mother will give birth to a star seed, although it is not a fixed rule and depends on each case. This can happen many decades before pregnancy or just before. In the same way, they will also adapt the genetics of the father so that it is in accordance with what has already been planned from the etheric plane. And in this case, it can also happen decades earlier. They also adopt a body that will no longer use a soul or Atma that, by its own plans from before birth, will leave a healthy body and adapt it so that another Atma can use it in a walk-in way. Many times, an Atma only wants to live until a certain age, only certain experiences. Many times, they arrange to leave with an accident or something along those lines, but other times, if someone else from the other side agrees, they can inherit a healthy body, replacing the original Atma, although it retains memories of the original because those memories remain in the physical mind or network of neurons, and that are also written in the DNA as a hard disk. The memories are vague, and the new Atma will feel itself as both the previous person and the new person, because it may or may not remember that it entered as a walk-in. The reason for which it seems that the negatives are after people's souls is because they use and experiment on them in order to force the bodies to cement the artificial changes they have given them through their experiments, as we have already said. This happens more than anything with military abductions, or milab as they are known. What happens is that they are just trying to master that technology that other races like the gardeners or we have already perfected. What they do not know is that there is a limit, and that limit cannot be altered in any way, and it is imposed by the soul itself and the source. There is no point in playing God and thus altering so many organisms because they always end up in dead ends. They will become extinct in a few generations. The source knows what it is doing and why it is doing it, and knows how to protect itself, because being the conjunction of all consciousnesses, it is wise. It already has self-defense mechanisms to prevent regressive and atrocious experiments that seek to create slave races perfect for their purposes. There is no time. From the most expanded perspective, everything is already. Therefore, everything that the regressive ones try, that in themselves are part of the source or the original self, is already foreseen. Without a soul, there is no correct foundation in the genes. So they always want to find a way to change the soul or manipulate it to use it for their purposes. That is, genetic engineering at the level of the soul. From the point of view of human or humanoid races based on Illyrian genetics, there are two classes. The primary ones are those that are accepted that were manifested directly from the original source, and the secondary ones that are those resulting from an artificial alteration of the primary one. As humans are of Illyrian origin, but their genetics are restricted to 3D density, they would fall into the secondary race classification. Here, once again, I must emphasize that as the level of consciousness of the individual is what determines the density to be perceived, it will also determine the activation of their own genes. Since the human race is limited to the third density, both by artificially imposed frequencies and by perception of consciousness, its DNA is limited, but still complete. But the moment a person crosses the Van Allen bands that delimit the third density and move to fifth density, in a short time they will inexorably activate all their DNA, conferring all the attributes and characteristics of the primary Illyrian race to which they belong. The matrix and the 3D as the imposed frequency is quickly weakening by many factors already exposed in the videos about the matrix. But, as if that were not enough, the entire quadrant of the galaxy where this solar system is located is rising in frequency, so that the rise of the human race to the fifth density is inevitable. With what I have just stated above, I must give you a warning that can be taken as good or bad, depending on the point of view. The awakening of the individual and collective consciousness, the inexorable rise of frequency from the third to the fifth density, will bring about the fading or the destruction of all the values and characteristics that have defined the human race for hundreds, if not thousands of years. By being aware of what is really happening around them, by functioning in fifth density, and by activating their genes from 2 strands, 22-23 chromosomes, to an original system of 12 strands, 24 chromosomes, the human race can no longer be considered as such. As long as they are confined to 3D density, and within that matrix, your race as such will remain the only one in the galaxy. Once outside, it will no longer be. From this point of view, the events that you witness today are truly the end of the human race as such. On Earth, only 2 theories are known with which to explain the existence of life. One, creationism, which holds that everything, including living beings, were created by an all-powerful Supreme Being. This is only supported by a system of imposed values. 2. Evolutionism, which holds that life was created in a course of a very long time by natural selection. The natural selection only works in a limited way, being able with this method to filter and modify certain physical attributes of a species through the principle of the survival of the fittest. It is also used to artificially select the desired attributes by combining individuals who possess them through the application or observation of regressive and dominant genes. For example, this is how the different dog breeds on Earth have been created. However, they are all dogs, and they are still the same species. The natural selection by itself cannot create a new species from another, because it is only an environmental factor that filters certain individuals from others, according to the circumstances. As these circumstances are factors that alter the experience perception of the individual, the natural selection has to do with the formation of a new being or species, but not by mutation, but, once again, by the intervention of a creative consciousness, but in itself alone does not form any new species. A dog is a dog, a cat is a cat, a monkey is a monkey, and a human is a human. The work of Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species Through Natural Selection, or The Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, first published in 1859, is a very convincing and logical theory at first sight, but exploits the human inability to observe the species and its long-term development, and does not reflect the external reality empirically observable by human science itself, as there is no single evidence to support it. There is no transitional fossil, relegating it to be another imposed theory, where the human population is forced to believe in it, taking it as a proven scientific fact. Charles Darwin was a 33rd degree Mason and a member of the Royal Society. His work was imposed with the agenda of controlling and silencing the other naturalists of the day, who were already formulating their own theories that could expose the lies of the controller cabal. For the belief system of Taiheta, its art, its spirituality, its philosophy and its science, altogether the same, it is accepted and observed that there is no physical world and a separate spiritual world. It is also accepted that there are no separate existential planes, but rather that everything is based on the limits of the perception of each individual consciousness, and that determines the plane in which they live. If the existential planes are mentioned above and in other works as separate, it is for the reference only, to make the concept easier to understand. The greater the awareness, the individual realizes more things, perceives more things. Therefore, he realizes increasingly higher planes, because these always grow in complexity. The level of consciousness determines the plane you can perceive and where you will be. It is accepted that there is no physical world, but everything is an idea embodied in a consciousness. The physical world is only a part of a great interconnected whole in which all the existential planes coexist and exist at the same time, forming together the original source, the great self. All seemingly individual consciousnesses are holographic fragments of the great self, and in their own right, they are the great self or source itself, these being only points of attention or nodes of standing waves, crests of waves, within an immense sea of consciousness. The consciousnesses are only waves contemplating and worrying about their own finite nature, when they are in themselves the sea of consciousness, one and the same, inseparable. Each individual consciousness is nothing more than a current that flows from the most basic back to the most complex, remembering what it is, what it has always been, as it progresses in its own spiritual evolution. As the level of the existential plane or level of consciousness increases, time becomes more and more plastic. Time is only the result of the consciousness that perceives and animates you to have an experience. For Taygeta, the universe, the all, never had a beginning and will never have an end. It is only and always has been. Biology, animals, plants, and the others are an inseparable part of that whole, an inseparable part of the universe itself. They are the shadow on a lower plane of something progressively more and more complex on higher planes. How much of the all we can perceive depends entirely on our level of consciousness. There are no good beings or bad beings. They are all inseparable parts of the same original source, of the great self. The good and the bad are only points of view, contrast to perceived duality, and perceptions based on what we are experiencing in this or that moment as holographic fragments of the great whole. As we move forward in consciousness, we also dissolve the idea of separation in which we include others and everything else as part of ourselves. Being negative or having ideas, agendas, or regressive and destructive behaviors go against the principle of the great I that integrates everything, because by growing in consciousness, the duality is dissolved. Only the positive prevails. Love, the integration of everything as part of oneself. As one advances in the level of consciousness and by incorporating and integrating all things, especially the other persons and beings with consciousness as part of oneself, individuality is not lost but only expands, being that in the end each consciousness in a holographic way will be perceived as the great I, or the original source that has always been. However, from our current level we realize that we simply cannot understand it all by not being equipped from our current position. But our relentless pursuit of knowledge will always give us something more to learn and will always challenge us to try to understand increasingly complex things as we seek our way back home. Swaruu of Erra. Wow, quite intense topics you went into in this essay. Thank you very much. Some of the things I suspected and others are new to me. For example, at one point you were explaining how altering the DNA without adjusting the admatic component results in failures, sicknesses, etc. Is it perhaps how the reptiles damaged our organism that is ridden with so many sicknesses? Because I understand they tried to alter us genetically at first, then, after not having much success, they resorted to the alteration through mental manipulation. But maybe results remained, us getting sick, dying so early, etc.? No, not really, but you are close. Reptilians damaged your DNA using mind control only. The problem is that they are not the only players here. There is another part, black goo, that alters and damages DNA directly with scalar frequency technology of very, very advanced nature. This subject I am dealing with and writing about right now in Biology 4. I see. What race is it used by? It's coming from above, from higher realms, difficult to pinpoint it. But our science determined that it's not a race who designed it, but the goo itself is a race. And it emanates from a planet as its blood. So it's planetary energy, planet as in a living organism, and it's not from Earth. It invaded Earth at 2 times in history, 80,000 years ago and then again 12,500 years ago during the time-mad planet destruction. It mimics the harmonic impression manifestation, so it looks like its source when it's not. That's why it's so dangerous. Okay, if you're going to explain it more in your essay, then I won't ask any more about it now. Yes, I am working on it right now. That's what I'm doing precisely. Okay, moving on to the next topic you mentioned. You said they were now separating the Atmas of the people to create a new race, since changing just the DNA itself doesn't work. I would like to ask, who is doing that at the moment and why? And what race are they trying to create and why? Reptilians Kingu, Naga Draco, and other archontic races, Maitre, tall greys, and some factions of the Malakak, tall whites. Why? To create a race that is completely exploitable and with no free will. Humans are not that good for them because many fight back, and recently many have awakened. Okay, you said they have been isolating the Atma signal and putting it in some kind of container and giving it a false experience so the person thinks he is in the body. How can we know this is not already happening with all our race right now? Can you confirm one way or the other? It is happening to your race right now. That's the problem. Also, the experience of these souls is fed using the matrix, the 100% false one. Yes, but I mean, I understand that this is happening to the isolated individuals now, but it's not happening to all of us collectively yet. That's why you are warning us about it, right? See it this way. On Earth, all are under the 3D matrix. And the 3D matrix in a very real way is also that. Controlled sensory perception programming. And even then, there is a deeper level. People trapped inside containers with a false experience inside the false experience, a level deeper. Okay, so not all of us are in containers. How many people on Earth are in containers? I cannot know exactly how many, but we are talking about a few 100,000 people, maybe even over 1 million. I cannot know for sure because they are in the dumps deep underground, but not less than a few 100,000. So they are still different from non-real people we just talked about. No, these are real people because they are the signal from source trapped there. Unreal people have no signal to trap. How could one know if they are one of those? You can't, or it's a deep inner knowing, or another ET faction like mine could tell you. The problem is that it also enters in conflict with being inside the 3D false matrix anyway. In short, it's not easy to know. In the end, from the point of view of the trapped soul, it's just another experience, no different from having a body. The body does the same as the container. It's yet another container. Because it's the experience that is real for the soul. Okay, but how is their experience being false and imposed on them if they are here sharing the same world with me? Easy. They are not. They are one level down, in their own world. They are not with you. They are not near me? Where are they? Deep underground, in a jar. This is totally another set or dynamics from the 3D matrix. They don't overlap in experience. even if I assume many container-trapped souls will have an experience like being in the 3D matrix you are in. I see. Wow. So how does their Atma get taken? It looks like they abduct people, move the Atma into a container, usually done to small children, because those are easier to program. But how can it be done technically, to remove your soul from the body? And what happens to the body? It's done with a container that has the same frequency of the original biological body. It's a technical device. The body is inserted into the container and it's under sensory deprivation. They remove the body and the soul remains there, thinking it still has a body. The soul will leave the body under great pain or stress. It retracts into the container that makes it think that it has escaped the initial torture. Also, the body is given a large dose of mercury that retracts the soul because it's very painful, especially for small children. This is also the reason there is mercury in the vaccines given to small children, to remove their soul. I have detailed information about all this. Okay, so basically it cannot be done just at night during normal sleep. They need to physically take you there first, right? Right. They must take you to a ship or to an underground installation first. I still don't understand. If their soul is in a container, how come they are then living out their experiences in a new body, or how? And how if their soul is in a container? I'm sorry, this is all new to me. It's a technological device that handles frequency. It gives the soul the idea that it's having a life. But it's a computer giving it the experience, the visual effects and the sounds and other senses. After all, there is no body, it's all energy. They manage that energy with the device. It's all frequency management, like when they isolate brainwaves to impose images, like in synthetic telepathy. And their original bodies are destroyed? The original biological bodies are either used to impersonate the person with a reptilian soul inside, or they are plain and simply eaten. Okay, wow. Is there a way to protect oneself against this? Yes. Having a high frequency will repel them from getting even close to you. As I mentioned in another paper, the higher your frequency is, the more radioactive you are to them. And the most important step to raise your frequency over this, to protect yourself, is to stop eating animals. Those are people too. They are not food. If you eat someone, you are giving your consent to be eaten yourself. I understand. Now, this is where I struggle. Remember you were saying that if I don't see something or don't believe in something, it's not in my world? So imagine I have a child. These things we are talking about are not in my world. I had no idea about them. They didn't exist in my reality. And my child still gets taken and it happens. How do you explain that? When does it cross over to my world? If I didn't believe it before or didn't know about it? Because at some point or another, it was or is part of your reality, mostly this occurring at a subconscious level and because of contracts you made even before birth. And also, at the same time, if it's not in your world, it will not happen to you. Even if people see this information, because we are not only telling them the bad news, but we are telling them that they can defend themselves. And also, this is another case of two contradictory things being true. At one personal level, it's not in your world, and yet on another it is, like it or not, and you cannot be blind to this horrible fact that is happening to tens of thousands of people all over the world. Children disappear in the millions every year all over the world. And one of the main reasons those children are taken and not others is because they are consuming meat. This brings me to the next question I was going to ask. Why are you sharing this information with us if bringing it to our attention could be making it more real? Because the only way to stop all this is because you say no to all this as a collective. Even at a personal level, your no is more than enough. My main goal with all my information is to empower people. They can be comfortable saying that those things are not in their world, and they are not, but also it is an ostrich way to go about reality. You cannot be all love and light as they think we Pleiadians are. We have guns and swords. You must all learn to be spiritual and manage reality wisely, but you must also learn when and how to bite. But people cannot do anything if they don't know the facts. Facts of incredible importance, like do not eat animals. They think eating a steak is innocent enough. It is not. It's condemning you to be a steak. People must know that kind of things. Yes, very important. Now, you also mentioned they look for or have already registered starseed Admas. Should I be worried? Do you really want to know that? Of course. Yes, they do look for them. Yet your natural high frequency is serving like an invincibility energy suit protecting you. This is not fringe, it's the truth. And fear is their most used weapon. If you are fearless, you are invincible in the matrix, and it's literally. But they are looking for them for what? To put me in a container? You cannot be placed in a container because the container only goes as high up in frequency as their creator can go logically. If you are above, then you will simply retract from the container. And you will have never gone as far as to find yourself in one anyway. This is why they must first lower the frequency of the soul so it can be placed in a container and or harvested. So that's why they push meat as part of the human diet. Wow, this is so important what you just said. And beside that, I must say, I am not afraid. I don't know why, but I'm not. They can't take me. I just know it. Then they can't. It's that simple. If people knew this, the world would be paradise on earth. Okay, now the last question about all this, and let's finish on something more positive and lighter. You mentioned the 5D transition is inevitable, and that the human race will not be the same anymore. That this is the end of the human race as we know it. I know you don't give dates, but are there any provisions of when this might happen? Would I live to see it in this life, for example? Around 2025. Really? A little before or a little after. This deals with multiple timelines, so I disagree with giving dates. But I mean, all false people will fall off, you will all come down, there will be no money, etc.? Yes. Wow. And a quick question. What will happen with all the positive, good people, but who simply have no idea about any of this? Will they be able to experience it too, so we can tell them, I told you so? Or they will go into their own timeline and it will be like they disappeared and us to them. I so would like to be able to tell them, I told you so. Above everything, the answer to all your last questions is simple and straight. Each person is a timeline and a parallel reality on their own. So dates and ascension and everything else will occur in a personal manner. And yet, as those timelines sometimes are close enough as to be seen as a shared reality, then you can very well say your "I told you so."
Ha! Great! I so want to do it.
Then you will.
Many of us here do too. Look, we are not crazy, you see?
I know, me as well. Count me in.
I really do hope it will happen. You think you will be there till then?
I don't know, I think I will be. I have nothing to go back to at home. I prefer to stay here and help. Many things will come to pass, where you will be able to say, "I told you so."